Tonight, I'm taking you back to another one of the early books from my childhood. This one was my sister's, and I would swipe it all the time to read it. But this little girl that this book is about, she was quite my hero. So join me for Book Bites with the Booklady. Hey everybody, hi. It is Gretchen Shepherd again with Book Bites with the Booklady. And tonight, not Podpomo, day 18. Wow. Trying to put one of these out every day in November for you. That's just for the month of November. It's a challenge to myself and just to be able to share about 30 different books that I think are worth your time. This one tonight takes me back. I talked about a book last week that had been the first book I ever read. This was probably the second one. And this is about a really special little girl. And the book was originally written and in Swedish, and it is by a woman named Astrid Lindgren. And the book, well, you probably will recognize, is about a little girl with braids and red hair. And her name is Pippi Longstocking. Now, Pippi came into the world in this book in 1950. And she still can be found on bookshelves and libraries and treasured spots that we keep the books that we've had. My granddaughter loves this book. It's an amazing kind of things. But what's fun to watch and to listen to is how things have changed in 75 years, almost 75 years since Pippi came into being. So join me for a little book bite and be introduced to Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. Pippi moves to Villa Vellicula, Chapter 1. Way out at the end of a tiny little town was an old, overgrown garden, and in the garden there was an old house, and in the house lived Pippi Longstocking. She was 9 years old, and she lived there all alone. She had no mother and no father, and that was, of course, very nice because there was no one to tell her to go to bed just when she was having the most fun, and no one who could make her take cod liver oil when she much preferred caramel candy. Once upon a time, Pippi had had a father of whom she was extremely fond. Naturally, she had had a mother, too, but that was so long ago that Pippi didn't remember her at all. Her mother had died when Pippi was just a tiny baby and lay in a cradle and howled so that nobody could go anywhere near her. Pippi was sure that her mother was now up in heaven watching her little girl through a peephole in the sky, and Pippi often waved up to her and called, "Don't you worry about me. I'll always come out on top." Pippi had not forgotten her father. He was a sea captain who sailed on the great ocean, and Pippi had sailed with him in his ship until one day her father was blown overboard in a storm and disappeared. But Pippi was absolutely certain that he would come back. She would never believe that he had drowned. She was sure he had floated until he landed on an island inhabited by cannibals. And she thought he had become the king of all the cannibals and went around with a golden crown on his head all day long. "My papa is a cannibal king. It certainly isn't every child who has such a stylish papa," Pippi used to say with satisfaction. "And as soon as my papa has built himself a boat, he will come and get me, and I'll be a cannibal princess. Hi-ho, won't that be exciting?" Her father had bought the old house in the garden many years ago. He thought he would live there with Pippi when he grew old and couldn't sail the seas any longer. And then this annoying thing had to happen, that he was blown into the ocean, and while Pippi was waiting for him to come back, she went straight home to Villa Bellacula. That was the name of the house. It stood there ready and waiting for her. One lovely summer evening she had said goodbye to all the sailors on her father's boat. They were all fond of Pippi, and she of them. "So long, boys," she said, and kissed each one on the forehead. "Don't you worry about me. I'll always come out on top." 2 things she took with her from the ship. A little monkey whose name was Mr. Nielsen. He was a present from her father. And a big suitcase full of gold pieces. The sailors stood upon the deck and watched as long as they could see her. She walked straight ahead without looking back at all, with Mr. Nelson on her shoulder and her suitcase in her hand. "A remarkable child," said one of the sailors as Pippi disappeared into the distance. He was right. Pippi was indeed a remarkable child. The most remarkable thing about her was that she was so strong. She was so very strong that in the whole wide world there was not a single police officer as strong as she. Why, she could lift a whole horse if she wanted to. And she wanted to. She had a horse of her own that she had bought with one of her many gold pieces the day she came home to Villa Bellacula. She had always longed for a horse, and now here he was, living on the porch. When Pippi wanted to drink her afternoon coffee there, she simply lifted him down into the garden. Beside Villa Bellacula was another garden and another house, and in that house lived a father and a mother and 2 charming children, a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Tommy and the girl's Annika. They were good, well brought up, and obedient children. Tommy would never think of biting his nails, and he always did exactly what his mother told him to do. Annika never fussed when she didn't get her own way, and she always looked pretty in her little well-ironed cotton dresses. She took the greatest care not to get them dirty. Tommy and Annika played nicely with each other in their garden, but they had often wished for a playmate. While Pippi was still sailing on the ocean with her father, they often used to hang over the fence and say to each other, "Isn't it silly that nobody ever moves into that house? Somebody ought to live there, somebody with children." On that lovely summer evening when Pippi for the first time stepped over the threshold of Villa Bellacula, Tommy and Annika were not at home. They had gone to visit their grandmother for a week, and so they had no idea that anybody had moved into the house next door. On the first day after they came home again, they stood by the gate looking out onto the street, and even then they didn't know that there actually was a playmate so near. Just as they were standing there considering what they should do and wondering whether anything exciting was likely to happen or whether it was going to be one of those dull days when they couldn't think of anything to play, just then the gate of Villa Bellacula opened and a little girl stepped out. She was the most remarkable girl Tommy and Annika had ever seen. She was Miss Pippi Longstocking, out for her morning promenade. This is the way she looked. Her hair, the color of a carrot, was braided in 2 tight braids that stuck straight out. Her nose was the shape of a very small potato and was dotted all over with freckles. It must be admitted that the mouth under this nose was a very wide one, with strong white teeth. Her dress was rather unusual. Pippi herself had made it. She had meant it to be blue, but there wasn't quite enough blue cloth, so Pippi had sewed little red pieces on it here and there. On her long, thin legs, she wore a pair of long stockings, one brown and the other black. And she had on a pair of black shoes that were exactly twice as long as her feet. These shoes her father had bought for her in South America so that Pippi would have something to wear, something to grow into, and she never wanted to wear any others. But the thing that made Tommy and Annika open their eyes widest of all was the monkey sitting on the strange girl's shoulder. It was a little monkey dressed in blue pants, yellow jacket, and a white straw hat. Pippi walked along the street with one foot on the sidewalk and the other in the gutter. Tommy and Annika watched as long as they could see her. In a little while she came back, and now she was walking backward. That was because she didn't want to turn around to get home. When she reached Tommy and Annika's gate, she stopped. The children looked at each other in silence, and at last Tommy spoke. "Why did you walk backwards?" "Why did I walk backward?" said Pippi. "Isn't this a free country? Can't a person walk any way she wants to? For that matter, let me tell you that in Egypt, everybody walks that way, and nobody thinks it's the least bit strange." "How do you know?" asked Tommy. "You ever been to Egypt, have you?" "I've never been in Egypt." "Indeed I have." "Ha! That's one thing you can be sure of. I have been all over the world and seen many things stranger than people walking backward. I wonder what you would have said if I had come along walking on my hands the way they do in farthest India." And I think I'll stop there. As you can see, Pippi is quite the character. But like I said, she was a bit of my hero as a little freckle-faced redhead kid. I didn't have the braids, but boy, Pippi's spirit spoke to me oh so often. And that's Book Bites for tonight. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. And until the next episode, everyone, keep looking for the beauty hidden in plain sight. It's all around you, but the first place you'll find it is when you go look in the mirror. And I'll see you next time.